mean powers
YouTube, I'm back again today for another How to Play video, and today I'm excited to teach you how to play Articles of War Privateer. This is from Sewage Treatment Games. It's for 2 to 6 players, ages 10 plus, take you 20 to 30 minutes to play, and let's get into it. So first and foremost, what you're going to want to do is set the board out in the middle where everyone can reach it. You're going to get all of the golden doubloons and put them into the little gold section up here in the corner. You're going to make sure that each player has a player reference card and 2 doubloons to start the game. You're going to take all 6 of these cards, which will have pictures on them, but no text on them, put them back into the box. You'll only need that for campaign gameplay. And then you're going to take these 6 cards and you're going to shuffle them up and each player is going to get one of these. Now, this is going to dictate not only what asymmetrical special ability you will get to use once per game, but it will also dictate what color you are. So right now, we have a 2-player game set up. We're going to have green versus black, which means green will get their ships, black will get their ships. The white ship will go right in the center diamond spot. That's called the merchant ship. And then any ships for players that are not in the game can go back into the box. You won't need them. Next, what you're going to do is you're going to get all the dice. You're going to set them down here in the map section. We'll use those a little bit later. Next, all the players are going to take a look on the top right-hand corner of their player card here, and they're going to see who has the lowest number, and then that is going to be the player who's going to put their ship out first. So you're going to place your ship onto one of these circle hexes around the board, and there's 6. So we'll just say this player is going to set up right here. Next, you're also going to set out one more of your ships anywhere around you on one of the 6 spaces that is immediately around you. So we'll just say right here for this player. And then the next player in numerical order is going to do that as well. So in this particular example, it would jump to 6. However, if we had 4 and 5 in the game, it would go 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. But since we only have 2 players, we'll jump to green, who is the number 6, and they'll set up right here, and we'll say they'll set their second ship up like so. Once everyone has set out 2 ships, you're going to go back to the lowest numbered player, and they're going to have an option to spend their 2 doubloons to put out a 3rd ship, which once again has to be right next to their starter ship, which is in the circle slot. So we'll say they spend the $2 to put that one right there. And the green will refrain from doing that, which means their ship is going to go into the shipyard. They could potentially earn that later, and they get to hold on to their 2 doubloons. These are victory points at the end of the game. Once everyone has done that, the last player in turn order, so in this particular example it would be green, who has the number 6, is going to decide how much terrain is going to be out on the board. And there are 3 different types of terrains, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But the basic gist is that the more terrain you have around the board, the harder it is to navigate, which means the more terrain you have out there, the lengthier the game will be. At a minimum, you're always going to have at least 2 of each type of terrain, but you could have potentially all 4 of them in there if you would like. And any terrain you don't use will go back into the box. So you're going to take all this terrain, you're going to put it into the little cup right here, you're going to mix that up, and then in player order, you're going to take turns randomly drawing one of the terrains out of the board and then placing it onto the map with 2 rules that you have to follow. First, terrain tiles cannot be placed directly next to an enemy ship. So black, for instance, could not do this. However, they could do this since this is 1 space away. And this also includes the merchant ship as well. So you can't put it directly next to the merchant ship, but you can put it 2 spaces away. The other major thing to remember is you can place these directly next to your ship if you'd like to. And you can also place terrain next to other terrain as long as you're following the original rule, of course, which is that green could not put this right there, even though it is next to another piece of land. So we'll speed things up. And we've now got the board set up and ready to go when we put all the terrain out. So starting with the player with the lowest number and then going clockwise, not in order of what number you have, the game is going to start and it will go until only 1 player has ships left on the board, at which point you'll total up your doubloons and you'll see who wins, but we'll get there in a second. So on a turn, it's really quite simple. You are going to take 2 dice for every ship that you have on the board. So, for instance, black would be rolling 6 dice on their turn, and green would be rolling 4 dice on their turn, and now green would only be rolling 2 dice on their turn. Now, when it comes to dice, there's two types of dice in the game. There's cannonball dice, which are these D20s here, which go all the way up to the number 5. And there's movement dice, which are these D4s right here, which go up to the number 4. And you always have to roll at least one movement die for each ship. And this is really easy to remember as long as you're taking a look at your super useful player reference card right here, which actually breaks down exactly what combination of dice you can roll depending on how many ships you have. So since black is first, they're going to roll 6 dice, and I don't think they're really going to get super close to the green player because they're pretty far away from them. So I would imagine that they're going to roll 6 movement dice this turn. And once you've decided on which dice you're going to roll, you can roll them up and spend them in whatever order you wish. However, the big rule is that every single boat has to have at least 2 dice used for it, barring some sort of unforeseen circumstance where potentially your boat might get destroyed during your turn. And if that ever does happen, where your ship gets destroyed before you've had the opportunity for that ship to use 2 dice, that just means one of your dice you're not going to use this round. But now let's talk about how you're going to utilize these dice. And when it comes to movement, it's really quite simple. You take whichever dice you're going to use, and assuming you don't run into anything, you're just going to move in any one of the 6 directions around you that many spaces. So for instance, let's just say we take this 3 right here. We might go 1, 2, 3. We then take this die and put it back into the map area so that we can remember we have used it. So this ship has used one of their die, and if I wanted to, I could use another one of the dies to move it right now. However, I could also move another one of my ships. You can do whatever order you want to. So let's just say we're also going to move this ship right here, 1, 2, 3 spaces. Put the die into the map area, and I think you kind of understand. And you can backtrack. So for instance, if I really wanted to, I could, and I had a 3, I could go 1, 2, 3 and move right back to the same spot I was at before. Just remember that each one of your ships is going to have to move and sail at least one time during a turn. But now let's talk about what happens when you run into some of the various different things around the board. First, let's talk terrain. There are volcanoes, and if you ever run into a volcano, you're immediately dead. Your ship goes into the shipyard, and, well, that was not a very good choice. You probably shouldn't have done it. Likewise, if you ever steer your ship into a desert island, guess what? It's crushed, it's dead, and it goes into the shipyard. It's gone. But the one type of terrain tile you can move through are these right here. These are called reefs, but it's still dangerous to go through this. And if you ever move through a reef, you immediately roll one of the D20 cannonball dies as soon as you reach that spot. And if you get a 1, well, then unfortunately, your ship will sink. If not, then you continue your movement as before. So let's pretend that in this particular example, I still had 2 more movement spaces. I would then take those 2 movement spaces as if that terrain wasn't even there. And if you ever land directly on a reef, you roll to see if you get destroyed. So let's say I end my turn right here. I don't have any more movement. Next turn, I don't have to roll the die again to leave the reef. It's only when you enter into it. With the terrain out of the way, let's talk about the merchant ship in the middle. If you ever run into the merchant ship, so let's pretend that I have, say, 4 movement right here. I go 1, 2. You immediately stop whenever you reach a ship that is either your opponent's color or the merchant ship. And you have to decide what kind of boarding action you're going to do. So we'll focus on the merchant ship right now, and it's really quite simple. It's kind of a race to the merchant ship, because if you're the first person to the merchant ship, you have one of 2 options. First, if you happen to have an extra ship that you can put out in the shipyard, you can take over the merchant ship by removing it from the board and then placing your colored ship on any one of the 6 hexes directly around you. You won't be able to move it at all this turn, but you've essentially gained another ship, which is obviously very good. Now, in this particular scenario with black, we don't have an extra ship to put out there, which just means we're going to sink it. It gets put back into the box. And why we'd want to do that is because now green can't capture the merchant ship. But now let's talk about what happens when you run into one of your opponents, either by landing on them or trying to go through them, which you can't do. You automatically stop. So let's pretend black is right here and they go 1, 2, and they reach the green ship. If you do this, you are then going to have a roll-off. Each player is going to take one of the cannonball dice, and you are going to roll, and the player who has the highest number is going to win the combat. If you get a tie, you keep rolling until someone is the victor. And this works a little bit similar to the merchant ship once again. If you happen to have a ship in the yard over here, you could then destroy your opponent's ship by putting it into the yard, and then take your ship out and put it in one of the 6 empty spaces directly around you. You can't move it this turn, but you'll be able to move it in the future. Or if you don't want to capture their ship, or you can't capture their ship because you don't have an additional ship to put out, you can sink their ship, which means that their ship is going to go in the shipyard, and then you are going to gain 1 doubloon from the bank. And in both scenarios where you board a ship, either the merchant ship or an opponent's ship, if you have additional movement that you should get to do after that, you don't get to do it. So for instance, if I, roll the 4 and then I move 3 spaces to get here, I don't get to use that 1 additional movement. However, if I have only used 1 die on this ship, I still get to use my second die, which means I could potentially fire a cannon, which we'll talk about in a second, or move the ship away, which in this case might get it out of harm's way. The last 2 scenarios to talk about are what happens if you run into one of your own ship, which is perfectly fine. You could just move right around them. You can just never end your movement with 2 ships on the same spot. And also, if you go off the board, you lost your ship, and people at the table will probably laugh at you. No one gets gold, and your ship goes into the shipyard. So that pretty much covers sailing. But now let's talk about cannons and how shooting works. Instead of moving twice on a turn, you can move once and shoot, or you can shoot and move. And how shooting works is, you shoot exactly that many spaces away from you in any one of the 6 directions that you would like. And just like with sailing, your cannon is going to go in a completely straight line, and it must land exactly on the opponent's ship. If you roll a 4, for instance, and they are 5 spaces away or 3 spaces away, it won't do anything. However, if you hit their ship dead on, the ship will immediately go into the shipyard, and you will earn a doubloon. And to clarify, if you shoot down the merchant ship, you do not earn a doubloon. In the situation where you roll a cannon die and can't use it to sink anyone else's ship, you just don't use that die for the turn. The only other thing to mention about shooting your cannon deals with the volcano terrain, which you cannot shoot over. However, you can shoot over desert islands and over reefs. However, once a player has used all of their dice for the turn, play passes to the next player on the left, who will once again decide which dice they're going to roll. They roll the dice, and then they do their movement and their shooting if they want to. Now, the only aspect of the game I haven't talked about is the special ability that you were given at the beginning of the game. These special abilities will tell you exactly what to do and exactly when to do them. The only thing you need to know is if you don't use it, you lose it, and once you've used the special ability, you can't use it anymore during the game. But players are going to go clockwise around the table, moving around, trying to shoot each other until only one player is left on the board. That player is going to get 1 additional doubloon for being the last player left standing, and then you're going to count up each player's doubloons. The player with the most doubloons is going to be the winner of the game, and that's how you're going to play Articles of War Privateer. If this video helped you out, please consider giving this video a thumbs up, but go have some fun, and thanks for your time, YouTube.